Welcome everyone to the very last presentation of the NewMR Listening Festival. My name is Pettit, and I'm the Chief Research Officer of Conversation Strategies, a market research company that specializes in social media research. Today, I'd like to talk about data quality and how quick and simple it is to achieve, or not. As with any research methodology, whether it's surveys or focus groups or social media research, quality is the most important component of the work. Without quality, there's no validity, and with no validity, there's just no ability to generalize to any group other than the specific people who participated in the research. There are a couple of very common myths with social media research, including, of course, that it is easy and fast to do. While both may be true at a certain point in the research process, they're definitely not true throughout the entire process. So in this presentation, I'm going to demonstrate to you exactly what happens when social media research is conducted quick and dirty at certain stages instead of slow and careful. And today, when I say social media research, I'm referring to the automated collection and analysis of millions of naturally occurring user-generated comments in the social media space. So the first step in the social media research process is selecting your data set. You know the word you're interested in working with, and it's easy enough to search online for any records mentioning that word. Unfortunately, computers are only as smart as the person programming them. If you tell them to search for Target or Gap or Apple, that's exactly what they'll do. They'll find Target practice and the Gap in my teeth, and the apple pie in my oven. Of course, if you take some care and make sure you're seeking brand mentions, not keyword mentions, then you'll get data that actually refers to the store and the products. So what you see on this slide is both of those examples. We've got top 2 and bottom 2 box scores for a set of data that I gathered really quickly using just keywords, as well as a set of data that I gathered very carefully using brand words. So the first example shows Target data. We can see that if we collect our data really carefully and make sure it's actually about the Target store, our top 2 box scores are nearly 50%. But if we don't put any effort into how we collect the data and let things like Target practice and easy target confound our results, our top 2 box scores are only about 30%. That difference of 20 points is huge. And we see the same thing for bottom 2 box scores. 7% is definitely not the same as 14%. You might think this is just an unusual circumstance, but you see the exact same trend occurring for the Gap. And it also occurs for Apple, but with a little bit of a twist. So in this case, we're fortunate that the top 2 box scores of the clean and dirty data sets are the same. Well, we're fooled into thinking they're the same. But the bottom 2 box scores are really quite different. It's so easy to see how a brand manager could come to very different conclusions about consumer opinions if care isn't taken to define a data set according to brand words instead of keywords. Now, assuming that we've actually identified the brand name set of data and not just any data that happens to use a word in the brand name, let's now consider how we look for that data. There are many ways we talk about brands. We've all heard of an abundance of ways to talk about Walmart without actually saying Walmart. And how many of us talk about eating at McD's or Timmy's, or how we're sick of hearing about J-Lo and Lilo and Brangelina. These may not be the official brand identities, but these are the names that people consistently use to refer to a brand. So if you think about why people use these alternate terms, it's really clear that the way you name a brand has a good deal to do with how you perceive a brand. So what I've done is taken a sample of a few 100,000 messages about American Idol in this case. Then I divided them up into a number of different ways that people mention the brand name. Some people use the entire name exactly as it's written, Well, some people are a little bit lazy and they'll drop the space in between the two words. On the other hand, some people try to save space on Twitter, so they shorten the name quite a lot to things like AI10 or just idle. So as you can see in this chart, the way you name a brand is highly correlated to how you feel about it. So in this example, the sentiment towards American Idol among people who spell the brand name exactly as it should be is 9% positive and 28% negative. But if we look at conversations where the only change people make to the brand name is to remove the space between the two words, the conversations are suddenly 15% positive and 32% negative. That's a big change in sentiment when the only difference is one single press of the space bar. Even more shocking is what happens when completely different short forms are used. If we just shorten American Idol all the way down to AI10, we suddenly have conversations that are 49% positive and 9% negative. That's an astonishing difference in brand sentiment. It's really clear that the people choosing to use this particular short form are quite fond of the television show. So now imagine what would happen if you were tasked with evaluating a TV show and you neglected to include one of the more popular brand references. In this case, it could be the difference between a TV show being canceled or renewed. So now we've made sure that we're collecting all of the right brand names for our data set. But that's not the end of it. We also have to worry about collecting data from across the full range of the Internet. This is because people use different parts of the Internet for different things. Most of us are quite familiar with how people use Twitter. It's a great place to share links and learn about products, but it's also a great place to learn about a horrible line they're standing in or the cold food at the restaurant where they're eating. You could just collect all of your data from Twitter, and you get a good read on people who like to communicate in this way. But there's so much more to the Internet. You might be a blogger who likes to think through your opinions and present them carefully and logically. Or you might be someone who loves watching and commenting on photos and videos. So let's see how this turns out. In this example, I selected a few 100,000 records for Walmart, including all the inappropriate slang that people use, like, Walmart, or Walfart and Wally World. Then I divided up all those messages according to where they came from. So some come from blogs, and some come from Twitter, and some are from video or photo sites. You don't need me to point out just how completely different all of the top two and bottom two box scores are. So again, imagine if you wanted to conduct some really quick research on Walmart, and you only had time to gather data from microblogs or from Twitter. Your conclusion would be that about 29% of conversations about Walmart are positive, while about 25% of conversations are negative. But what if you'd only gathered data from blogs? Your conclusions would be vastly different. Now you would determine that about 35% of conversations were positive, whereas only 9% of conversations were negative. So what's the right answer here? We can't really say that one or the other is the right answer. Each of them reflects the individual source where the data was obtained, but it can't be generalized to other users of the Internet. If we do want to generalize to other people across the Internet, then we need to start thinking about sampling conversations from across the Internet and combining those results in a way that is more reflective of the entire Internet. Another component of social media research, where the slow and steady turtle wins the race, is in terms of variables or coding. Sure, you can do a quick search and find out which messages or conversations mention specific words. You could see how many times people are mentioning blue or brown or gray and instantly know which is the most popular color for your product. But I will hazard a guess that when you're talking about blue, you really don't mean Blu-ray discs or Blue Cross or JetBlue. And when you're talking about the color gray, I'm pretty sure you don't mean Earl Grey tea or gray area or gray matter or gray poupon. So let's take the example of the color brown. Perhaps your product comes in several colors and one of them is brown. So what do your consumers think of that particular feature? Well, you could whip together a really quick search for any messages containing the keyword brown. And if you did this, your conclusion would be that 33% of people have a positive opinion towards the brown version, while about 17% of people have a negative opinion of the brown version. But wait, there's a lot of ways to use the word brown that have nothing to do with it being a color. In fact, brown is a very popular last name for people. So in this case, our search for messages talking about the color brown also included messages about Mr. Jackson Brown, the author of Life's Little Instruction Book, and it included Chris Brown, a rap star who has a questionable past, as well as our beloved Charlie Brown, a cartoon character who barely knows what color is. So you can see just how different the results are for each of these browns and how they could have a negative influence on our results. If a lot of Charlie Brown data gets mixed in with the color brown data, then our bottom two box scores are going to rise. But if a lot of Jackson Brown data gets mixed in with the color brown data, then our top two box scores are going to rise. It is easy to just search for character strings like B-R-O-W-N, but this could easily lead you to conclude that your consumers prefer brown over blue, over gray, over red. And that's just one way to seriously annoy a tweeter. So today I've highlighted just 4 of the potential confounds that you could encounter. But I think it's clear how problematic quick and dirty social media research is. Imagine what would happen if you took the shortcut in each one of these cases. So you grabbed any data that mentioned McDonald's, and then you didn't bother to exclude mentions of the song Old MacDonald, and you didn't bother to include mentions of Mickey D or the Golden Arches, and then you only collected data from Twitter, and then you coded the color brown wrong so that it ended up including a lot of Chris Brown. And you concluded that your customers were furious about the color of McDonald's meat patties. That's just one messed up data file. Yeah, it was really quick, really easy to do, but you've just got a whole lot of a whole lot of garbage there. So as with any research method, there's always a quick and dirty way to gather and analyze the data. You may not be forced to do a second-person reread, to have a second-person reread your surveys for grammar and logic checks, but you do. And you may not be forced to send survey reminders, but you do. So if you want your results to be valid and reliable, you take the time that is required to do it correctly. And that's when you can call what you're doing market research. So finally, I'd like to thank Ray for organizing the festival and for allowing me to speak. I look forward to hearing from our audience on Twitter and on the NewMR website after the festival. Thank you very much.